But we're going to take a little time now to reflect on the comments of the Iranian president. He has written an article in the Washington Post in which he's talked about constructive engagement with a number of the world's most powerful countries. And he's also set out how he believes that some of the big issues in the Middle East can be sorted out in the region. Some people are saying this is a sign there's a major shift in how the Iranian government approaches the rest of the world. Others saying it's just words. We're waiting for action. Let's talk about this with three guests who are joining us live. We've got Payman, who's an Iranian student in Pisa in Italy, who joins us live over the internet. Negar Mortazavi is an Iranian journalist who's been based in Washington, D.C. for 11 years. And we're joined by our own Kazra Naji from BBC Persian. Negar, let me start with you. When you sat down and read the Washington Post, did you think, I'm reading something of real significance, a moment where my country is changing?
I thought a PR firm was involved. It was unexpected. And from speaking to Iranians, I mean, jokes aside, from speaking to Iranians inside Iran and even Iranians across the world within the past less than 24 hours, it seems like change has already started. And I think if a response comes from the international community, it will be able to go on, because I don't think it's a one-way road. It's not just something that should be started and continued by Iran. I think some kind of response from the international community, especially from the West, and right now especially from the US, is also needed to get this ball rolling.
What about you, Payman?
Yes, of course. I mean, it was very interesting that Rouhani's article was published as a follow-up to, I would call it a follow-up to Putin's article addressing the American nation. I believe that not only Iran's foreign policy is changing, but also the issue of Syria is becoming very critical. So that's why Rouhani is addressing this issue in a different way, different from the former presidents.
And Kazra, what about your analysis? Do you think we've seen a big, significant shift?
I think we are witnessing a change. Rouhani is a moderate. He's come after 8 years of hardliners in power in Iran, and he knows diplomacy. He has been unofficially and quietly an emissary of Iran for many years, traveling very widely to various capitals in the world. He knows diplomacy, and he's one of the very few people. I know him for many years. For many years, he has believed that if we're going to solve Iran's problems, we have to solve our problems with the United States. And his article today in Washington Post is basically a message saying we're open for business, we are predisposed to direct talks with the United States.
So they're open for business, but the question is, can he offer the United States exactly what President Obama wants, which is a promise that there will be no nuclear weapon development and that the inspectors can get in? Negar, are you convinced that he'll follow this up with actions?
I have a feeling, I mean, this is all still up for test and for seeing, but from what he has been saying and the sort of signals that are coming from the higher parts of the structure of power in Iran, it seems like there is a consensus as far as the Iranian power elite wanting to make a deal with the West or with the US on the nuclear issue. Now, let's not forget that there's always hardliners on both sides. Like there are hardliners in the West, there are also hardliners in Iran who somehow seem to be sidelined right now by maybe people who are in power, but that might not be something sustainable. It might not go on. They're always ready for Rouhani to fail. So I don't think the window of opportunity for both sides is very big.
Well, let's pick up on that point. Kazra, explain the power dynamics here. Does the president have the means to do whatever he wants? Has he got the backing to follow this through?
He has the confidence of Iran's supreme leader, the top hardliner in Iran, and it matters that he does have the confidence of the supreme leader. He himself has been on the record in the last few days saying that he has full authority to negotiate over Iran's nuclear program. So I suppose, and as Negar just mentioned, there seems there seems to be a consensus in Iran. For once, the top leaders in Iran are speaking more or less with the same voice. So if that's the case, then Mr. Rouhani is in a good position to make a start. How far he will go depends on things back at home in Iran and the hardliners, and how he has to win their support for anything that he will do in the future.
Kazra, Negar and Peyman, don't go anywhere. We're going to have a short break and we'll come back and talk about this some more. And a question I want to ask you, and I'd like to ask all of you watching, is how do you think America should now respond to the overtures that this article in the Washington Post presents? Do you think it should offer a straight bat, or do you think, in fact, President Obama should offer an invitation to talk? Do let us know. The hashtag is WHYS. You can get us on facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. We're going to take a very short break, then we'll come back and talk about the relationship between Iran and the US.
Let me say something.
Hi, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. Well, we're talking about this article that the president of Iran has written in the Washington Post. In it, he talks about a policy of constructive engagement. He says to understand some of Iran's policies, you have to comprehend the role of identity in how a country chooses its approach to the world. We're going to find out more about what he's been saying, and we're going to discuss how the watching world should respond. Well, I can see on the AFP Newswire that the French president's going to meet Hassan Rouhani on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly next week. Perhaps that's the first bit of evidence we've got that some of the Western powers will meet him halfway. We'll have to see. How do you think they should respond? Let us know through social media and also by giving us a call.
People are going to want to know. Let me say something.
Well, I've been mentioning to you this article written by President Rouhani. Let's just show you a little bit of it, which we can put up on the screen for you here. He writes, I announced my government's readiness to help facilitate dialogue between the Syrian government and the opposition. And well, we've discussed whether that might be a helpful contribution to the situation in Syria or not. And also he goes on to say the unilateral approach, which glorifies brute force and breeds violence, is clearly incapable of solving issues we all face. I think we can safely say that is aimed at the United States. Now, let me introduce you to the new guests that are joining us. We have Mohsen Milani, an Iranian-born academic at the University of South Florida. Also, Meir Javedenfar, a lecturer in Iranian politics in Tel Aviv. He's Iranian and Jewish. And still with us is Negar, live from Washington, D.C. Mohsen, let's start with you. How should America respond to these overtures from Iran?
I believe what Mr. Rouhani is offering is the best opportunity that I have seen in the past 25 to 30 years for establishing normal relations between the United States and Iran. I think it is a great opportunity. I think behind the charm offensive that everyone is talking about is a strategic decision made at the highest level of Iranian decision-making to somehow come out with an agreement to settle Iran's nuclear dispute with the West. The economic sanctions have truly hurt the Iranian economy. Iranian people are unhappy with the state of the economy. The 35 under generation, which is about 60% of the Iranian population, wants to be engaged with the rest of the world, and the Iranian leadership is aging. And therefore, I believe Ayatollah Khamenei, as well as President Rouhani, have calculated that it is high time for Iran to settle its nuclear dispute with the West. Therefore, I believe Washington should respond positively and quickly to the positive overtures coming from Iran's elected president.
But here's an interesting point, and you'll give us a perspective from Florida, and Negar, you can give us a perspective from Washington, D.C. And Tamez is tweeting us saying, if Obama engages with Iran, it will affect his popularity in the U.S. People will not want him to engage with the Iranians. Negar, do you think that's true?
I think it will affect his popularity with a certain portion of the population in the U.S., just as it would affect a certain portion of the population in Iran. But I don't think that is the majority of the population. I don't think the people who voted for President Obama are for not negotiating or having dialogue or relations with the world, the same as the voters who brought Mr. Rouhani into power, the 18 million people, a lot of them young, progressive women, people from the urban areas, including other areas also, who voted for some kind of change, for decreased tensions within the country and in the international world with the international community, including the West, including America. And I don't think it would offend a big part of the population. I wouldn't worry about that.
Mohsen?
If you recall, during the debate about whether the U.S. should or should not attack Syria, somewhere between 62 to 65% of American electorate, of American population, favored peaceful resolution of the crisis in Syria. American people are tired of war. They have experienced 2 devastating and expensive wars in 1 decade. And I believe if President Obama can somehow reach an agreement with Iran, he will be remembered as a president who opened up the U.S. to Iran, exactly as President Richard Nixon is remembered as this great American president who saw the opportunity to open up the West to China and thus start the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union.
Well, President Nixon may be remembered for that. He's remembered for a couple of other things as well. But it's interesting that both of you say this is not an issue. If you're watching in the United States, would you approve of President Obama responding to this, well, I was going to say letter, it's an article in the Washington Post, but it feels like a letter to America saying, let's engage, let's talk about this. Is that what you want your president to do? We're on the hashtag WHYS. Now let's go to Tel Aviv and speak to Meir, who's been listening to all of this. What's your analysis of what the Iranian president has had to say?
Well, to be honest with you, I think the article is important, but to me the signals that there may be change in the pipeline came from before, from a number of actions from President Rouhani. The first was his tweet, which some people denied, but I think it actually was his tweet, congratulating the Jewish people for the new year, for Rosh Hashanah. This was followed by Javad Zarif, his foreign minister, who also did that. That's unprecedented in the last decade in Iranian politics. This was also was followed by Rouhani speaking recently with the Revolutionary Guard. Basically, he's trying to mollify them by saying, yes, you can be part of the process, by staying out of the politics. You should help with the economy, but stay out of the politics. It seemed to me that he's getting the buy-in of the Revolutionary Guard for the changes that are on the way. Then we saw recently the release of political prisoners. I think Rouhani, I think it's safe to assume that he pressured the supreme leader to do this in order to give him mandate. So when he goes to the UN, people actually will talk to him about the nuclear program rather than Iran's abuse of human rights. And when you put all these signals together, I think these show us that, yes, Rouhani has been trying to create the mandate and the groundwork in order to bring some change. Now we've got this op-ed in Washington Post, which is his way of trying to mollify the American side. And now I think we have to wait and see what he can actually deliver.
Well, you mentioned the international stage, but you also refer to what's happening in Iran. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Is it your expectation that it becomes easier to express yourself, for instance, in Iran, easier to express political opposition in Iran? Are you anticipating that?
Definitely. I mean, look at the past few days, some of the very prominent political prisoners. I would say the most famous and internationally popular political prisoner, Nasrin Sotoudeh, the human rights lawyer, was released. That's not a coincidence. That's a very important signal. Look at the newspapers. Look at what newspapers are writing. In the past 8 years, it wasn't easy for newspapers, especially for reformist newspapers, to publish anything. It wasn't easy for them to have even President Khatami on their front cover, or even to discuss a lot of news about former President Rafsanjani. Now they're on cover every single day. There's, speaking of political prisoners, on the cover of reformist newspapers. These are unprecedented in Iran, especially in the past 8 years. So I think change has started, and I think it will be sustainable. I don't think this is just something that will die out soon.
Negar, you're in Washington, D.C. Lots of you watching around the world are getting in touch as well, from Syria, Uganda, Tanzania, Somalia, Cambodia, Egypt and Libya. Thank you very much indeed. Do keep getting in touch. Let me just go back to you, Mayor, in Tel Aviv, because we're hearing a lot of optimism from all three of you. But let's not forget how far apart Iran is from Israel and from America. Do you really think that that gap can be bridged in a meaningful way?
The gap can be bridged because the Iranian and the Israeli people don't have any problems. We've never been at war. Israel or nor Iran is occupying any of the territories. I think the problem has been that the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, who is more hardline than some of the neoconservatives we see in the United States. He's tried his best to keep a distance, to keep America at bay. I actually think some of the anti-Israel statements, which includes Holocaust denial by the Supreme Leader himself, their goal is to make it more difficult for the United States to get close to Iran. However, nowadays, it's very difficult for him to keep America away. The sanctions and also the Arab Spring in this region have shaken the confidence of the regime, that they're not immune to what is happening outside of the borders. And I think he's very reluctantly now giving a leeway to Rouhani in order to save the regime, because the red line for the regime is the economy. And that's a very important red line. What we don't know is how much actual mandate for change President Rouhani has.
And that's an interesting point, because a lot of the comment pieces that I've seen online today have been suggesting that the main driver of all of this is that the Iranian economy is suffering to such a great degree that Iran has to shift its position in order to try and get sanctions lifted. I'm not saying that's definitely what's happening, but a lot of analysts are looking at it that way. All three of you, thank you very much. Mohsen, Mayor and Negar, we appreciate you joining us live here on World Have Your Say. Stay with us because we're not going anywhere. We're going to